So good evening, everyone. On behalf of the U.S. General Services Administration, also known as GSA, and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, also referred to as CBP, we would like to welcome you to this hybrid public scoping meeting for the proposed modernization and expansion of the Grand Portage Land Port of Entry here in Grand Portage, Minnesota. GSA is preparing an environmental impact statement, or an EIS for short, in accordance with the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, also abbreviated as NEPA. GSA will be the lead agency for the EIS's development, with input and expertise from CBP, as well as the Grand Portage Band of the Lake Superior, Chippewa, who will be serving as a cooperating agency for the EIS. My name is Paul DiPaolo, and I'm a contractor with a firm called Potomac Hudson Engineering, or PHE, and we have a lot of acronyms here, but bear with us. We have been hired by GSA to support them in the development of the EIS. We thank you for taking the time to participate here today and attending virtually and coming out in person. Next slide. Use the keys. There we go. Yeah. So today's meeting will include a presentation by GSA and PHE on the NEPA process, as well as the National Historic Preservation Act planning process, which pertains to the protection of cultural resources. We will also hear from HGA, a design firm retained by GSA, regarding how GSA intends to solicit feedback on the overall design of the port, which we'll go into a little more later. As I mentioned, this meeting is being held in a hybrid format. The presentation is being given as part of an in-person meeting here at the Grand Portage State Park Visitor Center. It is also being provided virtually over the Zoom platform, and some individuals have dialed in to hear audio over the phone as well. Before we get into the details of today's meeting, just a few housekeeping items to cover. For those accessing the meeting through the Zoom platform, you'll see a toolbar at the bottom of your screen that allows you to send a chat message to the presenters. We have included a graphic on the slide here that shows that. Please do not use this chat feature to submit any sort of public comment during the presentation. There's other ways to do that, which we'll get into in a little more detail later on in the presentation. But you can use that feature to send us a note if you have any technical difficulties, and we'll do our best to troubleshoot that during the call. Also, please note if you'd like to view closed captionings, please click the Show Captions button here at the bottom of your screen. Microphones for all virtual attendees will be muted until it is time to hear public comments, which will happen after our presentation. And at that time, we'll revisit the instructions on how you can speak. For those here in person, as I mentioned earlier, if you have not already done so, we have a sign-up form at the sign-in table behind the stand over here. When it's your time to speak, we'll call on you to come up and do so. Please know we'll be keeping track of who is speaking and noting all the oral public comments for the administrative record for the project. We won't be going into depth on technical questions today regarding the project, but we'll consider and collect them for preparation of the EIS. We can clarify anything that we provide in the presentation on the NEPA process, as well as opportunities for public involvement. A copy of this presentation is available on the GSA website, which the link is here on the slides. It should also be posted in chat. If it's still need help, you can also just Google GSA Minnesota LPOE or Grand Portage LPOE, and note should be the first link that comes up. For those calling in, if you do not have computer access, you can also get a copy of the slides by contacting Michael Gonzar with GSA Region 5 at 312-810-2326. That's 312-810-2326 during business hours, and he will be able to provide you a copy of the presentation. Lastly, please note the meeting is being recorded and will be retained in the project's administrative record. And by staying in the meeting, you are agreeing to being recorded. If you have issues with that or you do not agree to this, we ask that you leave at this time. Next slide. So the agenda for today, we'll be covering several topics, including obviously introductions of other key project staff, purpose of the meeting, a description of the two key federal laws relevant to the project, NEPA and the National Historic Preservation Act, which I referenced earlier. We'll then provide a project overview, including the purpose and need for the project, as well as a brief description of the alternatives that will be analyzed in the EIS, as well as any potentially affected environmental resources. At that point, we'll turn it over to HGA to discuss how GSA intends to engage the public in the larger design process for the port. the end of the presentation, like I said, we'll have the public comment session as well as discuss next steps on the overall planning process. Next slide. So project team overview. So as I mentioned, my name is Paul DiPaolo, and I'm a contractor hired by GSA to assist in the preparation of the EIS. I'm joined here by GSA staff members, including Michael Gonzar, GSA's Region 5 NEPA Program Manager. Also present from GSA is Gary Walker in the back, Project Manager for the Land Port of Entry. And attending virtually, there is Regina Nally. She is GSA's Regional Historic Preservation Officer. I'm also joined here by some other team members, Matt Piscitelli and Jamie Bach of Search, who will be supporting on the National Historic Preservation Act compliance process, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then as well as members from HGA, Glenn Wagesbach and Ada Mestad, who will be presenting later on the project design process. And then other GSA and PHE representatives are in attendance but will not be speaking to. So today's presentation will provide a general understanding of the overall NEPA process and information about the project, including Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act process, as well as the next overall steps in the project plan. The information given tonight will be very general, as the main purpose of the meeting is to provide the public really an opportunity to provide a comment. This input will help us define the scope of issues that we should be considering in the EIS, as well as the shape of the larger planning process. We encourage you to visit the project website, again, that was previously provided, if you would like additional details on the project. In carrying out responsibilities under NEPA, GSA is committed to ensuring that proper consideration is provided to the quality of the natural, human, and cultural environment. Scoping is an important opportunity for you, the public, to provide your comments on the proposed Grand Portage Land Port of Entry modernization and expansion project. Scoping is a tool for identifying issues that should be addressed in the EIS. It allows the public to help define priorities and express stakeholder and community issues to GSA through your comments. It also allows GSA to gather early public input on the scope of the study, any alternatives we might want to consider, as well as any areas of concern that we should know about. And like I said, at the end of the presentation, give you some ways of how you can communicate that to us. In addition, as I alluded to earlier, GSA is using this meeting to solicit public feedback on important considerations that should be taken into the design of the port, how the port, you might want the port to look. Later, HGA is going to provide some examples on other recently developed ports, which you may have seen on some of the slides back there, and then lead a discussion on topics or issues that may be important to the tribe or local community, and that GSA should consider when moving forward with the design stage of the project. So now, if you haven't got bored with me, I will turn it over to Michael Gonzar, GSA's program manager, who will give a little more detail on the process.
Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making it to our public scoping meeting. It's great to see members of the Tribal Council here in person and members of the public attending. We know you guys are all very busy, so this means a lot to have you here in person and provide your input. So what is NEPA? NEPA is the nation's legislative charter for protection of the environment and provides for the consideration of environmental issues in federal agency planning and decision-making. NEPA requires agencies to prepare a document to consider whether the proposed action may significantly impact the quality of the natural, human, and cultural environment. In our case, the NEPA document is an EIS, and the EIS will inform GSA decision makers and the public about the potential environmental impacts implementing the proposed action and will be circulated for public review. NEPA does not mandate a particular decision, but it does ensure that the public is engaged and an assessment and that GSA's decisions are appropriately informed. To further inform GSA's decision-making, the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior Chippewa is serving as a cooperating agency, which we'll discuss in some future slides. The EIS process allows for the public to provide input in both the project scoping period and during the draft EIS public comment period. This input will be taken into consideration by the GSA during their decision-making process and will be included as part of the project's administrative record. Next slide, please. In addition to NEPA, compliance under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, or NHPA, of the Section 106 process for short, is being conducted concurrently. The NHPA is the most comprehensive federal law pertaining to the protection of cultural resources and establishes a program for the preservation of historic properties throughout the nation. And the protection of cultural resources, historic properties are those places that have significance to the history and understanding of our culture and its past. They can include districts with several historic resources, historic archaeological sites, buildings, structures, and objects, including those of traditional religious or cultural importance to an Indian tribe or Native Hawaiian organization that meet specific criteria. The NHPA requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their activities on historic properties. That means that the GSA is required to identify historically significant cultural resources that a project might affect, and in doing so, consult the state and tribal historic preservation officer and other interested parties who will work together to find ways to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any potential adverse effects that undertaking might have on significant historic resources. GSA is coordinating our Section 106 review with the NEPA process, and we are using the scoping process to seek input from interested parties on the identification of historic properties that may be affected by the proposed project and the potential effects of the project on those historic properties. If you know of historic properties that may be affected by the undertaking, you can provide this information during the comment period, which we're currently in. Currently, no sites within the study area are listed on or eligible within the listing on the National Register of Historic Places. Organizations with demonstrated interests may also request to be consulting parties in the Section 106 review. Consulting parties have a greater degree of involvement throughout the historic properties review. Requests to consulting parties can be submitted in the same way as the scoping comments, which will be described later and should detail the organization's particular interest in historic properties. For this specific project, as the project area or the area of potential effect, or APE, is entirely within the Grand Portage Reservation, GSA will consult directly with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, or TIPO, and consultation will be completed prior to the completion of the NEPA process. In addition to the tribe serving as a cooperating agency for the NEPA process, which I'll discuss in more detail on the next slide. Excuse me. As mentioned, given the project's location entirely within the Grand Portage Reservation, GSA recognizes the importance of maintaining close collaboration with the tribe. The key interest the tribe has in the project, as well as the need to respect tribal resources and concerns. As such, GSA has entered into a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU for short, with the tribe for them to serve as what's known as a cooperating agency, or CA. This means that GSA will work closely with the tribe in preparation of the NEPA document, including exchanging of critical information, conducting internal document reviews, and participating in ongoing meetings like this one to ensure tribal considerations are thoroughly addressed and respected within the EIS and NEPA process. Collaboration will not end with the NEPA process, as GSA is engaging with the tribe in a larger design of the port. Next slide, please. On September 22nd, 2023, GSA established a Notice of Intent, or NOI for short, in the Federal Register, announcing the intention to prepare an EIS. This notice initiated a 30-day public scoping period, which will run through October 22nd, 2023. As you can see, we're currently within the public scoping period. Also on this date, GSA mailed notices to interested parties, as well as publicized the meeting on their social media outlets and worked with the Grand Portage brand to publish on their own social media accounts. On September 29th, 2023, a newspaper notice also appeared in the Cook County News Herald. These notices, letters, and postings also announced today's public meeting and provided information about how the public could provide their comments. After the close of the scoping period and consideration of the scoping comments, GSA will conduct a detailed analysis of the impacts and alternatives to the project and will prepare a draft EIS. The draft EIS will be available for public review comment for 45 days, tentatively scheduled for spring of 2024. The period will also include an additional public meeting similar to this meeting, but will include a summary of GSA's analysis to provide the public a chance to comment on GSA's findings. At the close of the comment period, GSA will consider all substantive comments in preparation of the final EIS. The final EIS is targeted to be published in summer of 2024. After a wait period, the EIS process ends with signature of a record of decision, also referred to as a ROD. And we anticipate that to be in fall of 2024. I will now turn the presentation back over to Paul to give a little more detail on the project background and GSA's proposed action. Paul?
Great, thanks, Michael. Okay, so as I'm sure many of you know, the Grand Portage Land Port of Entry is located within the Grand Portage Reservation, approximately 5 miles northeast of the town of Grand Portage. It serves as the port of entry for vehicles and pedestrians crossing the U.S.-Canada border between Grand Portage and leaving Ontario. It's operated 24 hours per day, 7 days per week by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. CBP officers inspect all types of commercial and non-commercial traffic, including pedestrians at the port. The LPOE contains a main building, which was built around 1961, with primary and inspection canopies, secondary inspection garage, public restroom facility located between the northbound and southbound lanes of Highway 61, as shown here in this overview on the slide. There are 2 inbound primary inspection lanes, one for non-commercial vehicles and one for buses and commercial traffic, and then a commercial inspection dock and GSA garage lying north of the inbound lanes of Highway 61. There are currently no outbound inspection capabilities at the LPOE. So kind of just a little more background on the project of how we got here. A feasibility study was completed for the Grand Portage port in 2019. And in that study, it was determined that the existing facility does not meet the square footage requirements that CBP and GSA have standards for. And in that study, there were 3 alternatives identified for expanding and modernizing the port. Following the feasibility study, the next step in the process is called a program development study. And that is actually being led by HGA, who was here in attendance. The 35% version of that document further refined potential alternatives in collaboration with the Grand Portage Band. And the most recent report, 50% PDFs, identified a single alternative that remains under consideration. The operational footprint for this alternative is located entirely within the Minnesota Department of Transportation Highway 61 easement to address concerns with expansion and limit overall disturbance outside of areas that have already been disturbed. This is the alternative that will be considered in the EIS, along with a no-action alternative, which I'll explain in a couple of slides. So the purpose and need for the project, kind of the why of why we're here. The purpose of the proposed action is for GSA to support CBP's mission by bringing the port operations in line with current land port of entry design standards and operational requirements, while addressing existing deficiencies, which mainly fall into 2 broad categories: deficiencies in the overall site layout and substandard building conditions. The deficiencies result in traffic congestion during peak season, safety issues for the public and workers, and inefficient building space for agencies to efficiently conduct their missions. Therefore, in order to bring the port operations in line with CBP's design standards and operational requirements, the proposed action is needed to improve the capacity and functionality of the port to meet future demands while maintaining the capability to meet border security initiatives and to provide for the expeditious and safe inspection of the traveling public. So under the proposed action, GSA would enter into property rights agreements on land that is part of the Grand Portage Reservation, but is currently within the Highway 61 easement managed by MDOT. Through establishing these property rights agreements, the Grand Portage LPOE footprint could expand from the current approximately 5.7 acres to approximately 8.1 acres. The expansion, as we mentioned, will be conducted in close coordination with the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior. Construction activities will be conducted according to a phased approach, which would allow the port to remain open and operational throughout the construction process. The proposed action includes construction of a new commercial inspection building, a new main port building, new inspection areas, upgraded utilities, and new paving. GSA would also incorporate renewable energy technologies, specifically either geothermal or solar, into a sustainable, climate-resilient, and cyber-secure facility. GSA would seek to meet or exceed energy and sustainability goals established by federal guidelines and policies, along with industry-standard building codes and best practices. Overall, operations would be comparable to existing conditions, but would be performed more efficiently. So this slide depicts the conceptual layout of the proposed expanded and modernized port. For those of you attending this presentation over the phone, this image is also included in the project handout and the copy of this presentation, both of which are available by contacting Michael Gonzar via phone, which I mentioned earlier. As you can see here, the operational footprint would remain entirely within the MDOT easement, which is shown by the red dashed line here. Only a small area of temporary disturbance would be required outside of that easement during construction, which is on the north end. You can see the little area that shuts out there. But again, that would be temporary during construction. So the alternatives that will be considered in the analysis, as I mentioned, there will be the proposed action alternative 1, which is to construct the facilities as I previously described and as they are currently laid out in 50% PDS. And then we will also consider what's called a no action alternative. And, this is the alternative that represents the status quo, basically. So there will be no construction of a new facility, and the operations would generally remain similar to current conditions, although capacity and efficiency could degrade over time. Existing efficiencies would obviously remain and compromise CBP's mission to protect and secure the nation's border. So resources analyzed. So as part of the EIS process, we will analyze environmental resources within the project area, which includes providing a description of the affected environment or existing conditions for each resource, as well as analyzing potential impacts of project activities on these resources. GSA has preliminarily identified the following environmental resources listed here on the slide as being potentially affected. This includes cultural resources, geology and soils, water resources, biological resources, air quality and climate change, noise, traffic and transportation, land use and visual resources, socioeconomics, and environmental justice. This resource analysis will be informed by various supporting studies, including a wetlands delineation, a phase 1 environmental site assessment, a historic structures survey, and background research into the potential for archaeological resources. GSA will carefully consider potential impacts on each resource in a quantitative and or qualitative manner as applicable. GSA will also develop measures that would avoid or reduce the potential for resource impacts if needed. And as mentioned earlier, GSA invites the public to provide input on these specific resource concerns so that those concerns can be considered in the EIS development. So now I'll turn it over to Glenn and Nada from HGA to discuss the representation and symbolism within the larger port.
Thanks, Paul. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. Paul and Michael have been talking a lot about sort of the technical process and sort of the operational components of a new port. But what I'd like to talk about is in order to make sure that your community in this place can inspire the design of a new building, a new land port of entry, we really need to hear from you all about what matters. You know, those could be symbols. Those could be materials of construction, things that are important about the landscape surrounding here, the history of the place. This building that we're in right now is a great example of that. The material palette, you know, what the building's made of, the shapes that you see in the building, and even some of the artwork that shows some literal symbols from your community. All of those things could be included in a new port. So we really want to hear from you what's important. So and what should be considered. So today I've got on the next set of slides, the next slide, a few examples of other land ports to share with you. really to show kind of a survey. So not every land port looks the same, but they all kind of function the same. So it's not like it's a cookie cutter design that's placed in every border facility. So here's a great example of how buildings can connect communities through art and design. This is on the southern border in Columbus, New Mexico. Across the border is Paloma, Mexico, and a lot of US citizens live in Paloma. And so they will come into New Mexico, their kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, will come across the border and take the bus into Deming, New Mexico for school. So there's a lot of cross-border community connection there. And so that really inspired the design of this building. It might not be obvious at first, but when you start to pick it apart, like the mountain range nearby is called the Tres Hermanas Mountains, three women. You can see those three peaks are expressed in the three roof forms of the building that happen to also have solar panels on them. So they're serving a functional purpose as well as an expressive one. The material palette of the building is sort of a rusty steel color in this case that reflects the surrounding desert landscape. And another important component, you can see one example of it here, this sinuous wall, as well as this art piece, are all about those two cultures, those two communities, across the border and their connections. This is a map that an artist collaged photographs and imagery together to represent those communities and their connection. So switching gears to the next slide, this is one that's a little bit closer to home, not that close really. War Road is way across the state, but it might be a little bit more familiar with them. War Road's an interesting one because it really reflects the area's history and also that landscape. It's a forested landscape that was used for lumber, sawmilling, paper mills. In fact, you can see, I learned from Mel earlier that the truck in the picture on the lower right being processed, those are for paper pulp, right? Not for lumber. Stacks of wood there. So you can see in that one picture, the building is clad in wood, a couple of different kinds of wood, sort of warm wood and then also stained wood to help it sort of blend into the forested landscape a little bit better. The landscape design itself used some stones in a particular way to kind of mimic the rock outcrops that are found around War Road. So those were some ways that the design could actually reflect that landscape in the history of that community. They even brought it into the interior spaces, into the public lobbies to bring that wood so that it's present wherever people were around. So the next example on the next slide is one that actually the firm that I'm with designed in Derby Line, Vermont. Vermont is a completely different place. I don't know if you all have ever been there, but Vermont is all about stone quarries and sort of mining stone. There's a long history of that there. And so we try to capture that by integrating imagery of stone cutting and also the surrounding woods into the building by collaborating with local artists. So here's an example. The exterior of the building you can see is sort of a stone-like, actually architectural precast, so it's cast concrete panels that have a design texture to them. And here's an example of that texture. We worked with artists who took local wood and milled it very particularly, put it down in a texture, and that created the formwork for those panels. And so we were able to really seamlessly integrate art into the design of that building in that way. So those are three examples of basically the same building. They have to operate in the same way. The function is a secure sort of law enforcement function that CBP has to manage. So there are a lot of operational requirements, but you can see each one is a unique design solution that really reflects its place. And so we're really interested in hearing from you all what is important to you that could be reflected in this, the design of a new port. You can go to the next slide, please. So here are some prompt questions maybe to think about for the comment period. How can the new port of entry, the new building, support and respect the Grand Portage Anishinaabe community and culture? What matters? What should be expressed here as people are coming across the border and welcomed into your community? And if any, what story should the building tell? So just some open-ended questions to think about, and we'd love to talk to you about it later too. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Glenn. Go to the next slide, please. So just about one more slide here, and then we'll move into the public comment session. So just kind of on the next steps is kind of where we're going from here. So as outlined earlier, we are in the early stages of the NEPA process. The last day to submit scoping comments is October 22nd, which is about 2.5 weeks away. We will consider all scoping comments received while developing the draft EIS. And then once GSA announces the availability of the draft EIS, there will be another public comment period. And there will be another public comment, another public hearing similar to like we are here tonight to provide comments on the document, which Michael mentioned earlier is scheduled for next month. And then for those dialing, for those dialing in, the website we'll have more project updates can easily be Googled by Googling GSA Minnesota LPOE. It's also here on the slide. And then the formal design process will not begin until after the NEPA process is complete, likely in the fall of next year. So as mentioned, the public scoping period is meant to provide you an opportunity to provide comments on the proposed project, alternatives, concerns, analysis, as well as some of the topics that HGA just discussed. You can also request this time to be a consulting party for the historic resources consultation as part of Section 106. There are a few ways to provide written comments or to provide comments in addition to here tonight. You can provide written comments through mail or email to GSA at the address listed on the slide. These are also on the handout, which you can take away from here. We ask that you include Grand Portage LPOE EIS in any subject line for emails, just so we can track things a little better. For those dialing in, the email address to send that to is Michael, MICHAEL .Gonzar, GONCZAR @gsa.gov. And the mailing address is here on the slide. Michael Gonzar, U.S. General Services Administration, Region 5, 230 South Dearborn Street, Suite 3600, Chicago, Illinois 60604. For those attending in person, you may fill out some of the comment forms that we've provided. And there's also a court reporter here if you would like to verbally dictate your comment in private. She, after the presentation, will move into the back room. Another way for those attending virtually is to submit written comments through the Zoom Q&A feature. You may also provide verbal comments if you're attending virtually as well. We'll provide instructions on that in the next slide. So that wraps up the presentation. Appreciate you all bearing with us. So we can go on to the next slide here. Again, just some kind of housekeeping rules before we do that. So before you speak, if you wouldn't mind just spelling your first and last name, and if you have any affiliation that you would like to state, you can do that at that time. Please be respectful of the participants and presenters. Obviously refuse from any crass or vulgar language or directing any comments towards a single person or group. As I mentioned earlier, GSA will not be responding to technical questions, but we'll consider them in the preparation of the EIS and the larger design process. We will clarify anything that we have discussed, anything on the NEPA process or public involvement opportunities. To make sure we get, if there's as many comments as possible, we'd like to ask you limit your comments to about 3 minutes. We will have a countdown timer on the screen here in a couple minutes, so please just be respectful of folks' time. If you're on the phone, you can't see the screen, we will give you a 30-second verbal warning, but you may want to keep track of time just in case. So we would like everyone who wants to speak to have the opportunity to do so. So if you would like to speak a second time, we would ask to allow folks, everyone a chance to speak once, and then if there are additional time, we can let folks speak at that time. The recording of this meeting is going to be made available, and everyone's comments will be treated, whether they're verbal or handwritten, equally included as part of the administrative work. So we will now call on folks to provide public comments. If you have signed up in person, we will allow those here in person to speak first, and then we'll move forward to the virtual attendees. Again, if you would like to speak and you have not signed up, we have a small enough group here, so you can if you want to raise your hand, we can kind of call folks up, and if you're attending virtually, you can get in the queue to speak by using the raise hand function. It's the icon that you can see here on the slide. It looks like a hand. And if you're joining by phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Please only raise your hand once. If you do it multiple times, you'll lose your place in line. For those attending virtually, we'll call on you by your name or the last four digits of your phone. And when it's your turn to speak, we will send you a request to unmute yourself. At that point, you'll see a pop-up window come up that will let you unmute yourself. Then if you're on the phone, you'll hear an automated voice prompt, and you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Again, please introduce your name, spell it if you wouldn't mind, as well as any affiliation you'd like to declare. Once you're at that point, your 3 minutes will begin. We ask you to speak slowly and clearly. Again, the meeting is being transcribed, and we want to ensure that that can be done appropriately. When you're done speaking, we ask you to mute yourself by pressing the mute button or *6 on your phone again. Although we know we will also be helping you along in that process. And then again, if you'd like to provide a written comment presenting virtually, you can use the Q&A feature here as well. We've included some prompts here just to kind of help you with, I know we've covered a lot of material here. These are kind of just the general prompts that, we're really the intent here is to kind of get your concerns. This is your community. We want to make sure that we're respecting your concerns. You all know, better than us. So the way that we can ensure that's addressed is by providing a comment. So, and then as well as Glenn mentioned, kind of some of the other prompts regarding, project design. So with that, we're just going to take about 1 minute just to kind of get the technology navigating the cyber component. Just give us 1 second, and we will get ready to speak. If anyone in person would like to speak, I'll mute the microphone, and we will resume in about 60 to 90 seconds.
My name is Agatha Armstrong, AGATHAARMSTRONG. I'm the vice chair of the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior Chippewa. Your first question here on how the new port of entry can respect Grand Portage. I was hopeful that we would have more people in the community here. So it's part of this is more of a question than a comment, but we have some very talented people on the reservation, artistically and creative. And is there a way that, or is there a time limit when comments can be submitted for suggestions on the design or artwork?
So in terms of the scoping period, that ends on October 22nd, and that is for the EIS process, the NEPA process, kind of looking at the environmental impacts. With respect to, I guess, providing kind of you were talking about the feedback, that's probably something that would be more of a concern for HGA. And I think, really that could be provided at any time.
As a follow-up to that, then you have another meeting scheduled for 2024.
So that will be I think we're kind of going back and forth. So I'm sorry, I'm just making sure folks at home can hear what I'm saying. So yes, there will be we will move forward with the draft EIS analysis, analyzing potential environmental impacts based on kind of the current understanding of the project. And once that analysis has been complete, or at least the draft of it has been complete, it'll be circulated for public review, and we'll have another public comment here. And that meeting will one, be an opportunity for GSA to present kind of the findings of that analysis, as well as for the public to provide public comment on it.
So how far down the line are we then, date-wise, as far as people submitting suggestions or offering ideas on the actual design of the building? Just at any point in time, they can send something to the architect and say, this was a thought for incorporating into the design?
Yeah, I don't know, HGA, do you guys have any comment on that, or?
Basically, she's asking at what point is there a cutoff for providing you all feedback on kind of the questions that you were asking about, kind of, for folks to provide input on the design of the pool.
So I think
And if you could come up and speak a little louder.
I can provide a little bit of clarification, and Gary, if you need to jump in and correct me too. But we're in the program development study phase, where we're really just determining what the criteria are that the design build contractor, who will have an architect on board, will have to consider as part of their design effort. So part of those considerations could include symbols and meaningful materials and aspects of your community that you find important and should be included in the thinking that's driving the design of the building. So we're not actually designing the building yet, right? So that will come. And so my assumption is there will be, a process in which there will be, the ability to provide feedback. This is early.
Years, 18 months down the road before.
Yeah, I'm scared. Hackathon, so I think we have at least until probably second quarter 2024 to provide community input.
Okay.
It's really important that we get these ideas from the local community and how we can incorporate firms available to us that we might be able to engage them with the local community, and then the community provide their comments to the design builders. They will provide a concept to us, and then we would select. That would be what we're working on now, is support and make that. If we get 3 shortlisted design firms, design build firms, maybe the local community, and then engage their ideas.
Okay, sorry to keep on. Okay, so then my next question is, this presentation, it's being recorded. So I can offer that to the people in the community saying, this is what you missed, because I think this is exciting, and I think they're going to get excited when they see what's going on here. And that's why I'd like to get the community involved in this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Share a copy of this recording with you, I get that.
And the recording will be made available on GSA's website as well. So there'll be a link and you can share, pretty easily. So.
Okay, thank you.
volunteer to speak, so you're welcome. Okay.
Hi, my name is Malvina Van Portage, Malvingagnon. I have a number of questions on the slideshow. I spoke with several individuals here. Rain garden was one of the issues. Water contamination was another issue. I'm trying to roll this up and real quickly here. Traffic flow out here, back up on 61, going towards Rydens, peak fishing season, it's back up a half mile or so. There's one lane coming in. Is there a lane provided for turnaround? Amex comes and goes many times per day. How he has to go back against the flow of traffic. And I want to jump over to the square footage. How is that determined? The traffic flow, yearly traffic flow, is it FTE of the staff over there? Is there quarters in the buildings? Now we provide that locally in Grand Portage for staff members over there. In the EIS, are we going to protect? Now there's a old cemetery down here. It's outside the boundaries, but how far it extends up, we're not really sure. That might be addressed in the EIS.
Yeah, to answer your questions in one collective answer, a lot of that will be responded to in the environmental impact statement. So we will be analyzing the water contamination, the traffic flow, and then we'll be staying within the easement, the MDOT easement. So we will not be going outside of that realm, that delineated area, outside of the easement for the project.
And with respect to the cemetery or cultural or important heritage resources, we are working closely with Rob Hall, who is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and we do have consultants who are supporting on the Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act process. So those concerns will be considered from the cultural resources standpoint.
In the cultural aspect of Grand Portage, the port of entry, say if you're entering from Canada, Grand Portage people are a warm, welcoming people. When you come into the port of entry, it seems to be kind of foreboding. Everybody's got guns and jackets on, flak jackets on, and everything else like that. I would like to see something that's warmer. You see Columbus down there, New Mexico. We don't recognize Columbus Day. And that fence over there along the border, I don't know if we want to see anything like that up here. I have many more questions getting down there, but I'll put them on a comment form and get it over to Michael. Do you disseminate it to all the individuals, all the people involved, the comments that I received?
Sorry, we just have to mute the laptops to make sure there's not feedback. So public comments, any public comment that's provided, your spoken comment, any written comments, those will be addressed in the EIS. They'll be noted as an appendix to the EIS, which will be made publicly available. So to answer your question, yes, they will be reflected in the EIS at that point.
It goes my 3 minutes.
Bonjour, my name is April McCormick and I serve as the Secretary Treasurer for the Grand Portage Band. I just wanted to say that this project is undergoing consultation with our sovereign government, the tribal council, but also this community presentation is equally important. If you look at the long history of Grand Portage, you'll find that the sense of relationship and partnership between federal agencies is the key to a lot of the efforts that Grand Portage has done over the years. And I just want to note something that Mel brought up was housing for the port of entry, and GSA did not entertain the idea from the band in regards to housing. And so, but the other things that were improved were in regards to the footprint being reduced, and also considerations of water and trees and certain sections that trees would be removed. And so I would say that one of my concerns about this project is just that there aren't enough community members here to really provide a robust consultation. So it's my request of GSA that you come back and you host another consultation, perhaps a few, so that we can ensure that all of the community members, tribal citizens, get an opportunity to ask questions and interact with the design of this entry. Land port of entry. And then in connection with what Vice Chair Armstrong said, having Anishinaabe culture or imagery associated with the design of the building, not just art in the hall, but actually the design of the building. We're standing in a building that was designed collaboratively with the Grand Portage Band and the state DNR. And so their architect actually sat with the tribal council and designed the structure of this building to represent a Thunderbird. And we shared that in consultation. So I just wanted to say that Grand Portage is very proud of our culture and our connection to this sense of place. And it would be an excellent opportunity for this border port to really represent who we are to our visitors, whether they're coming up from Minnesota onto the reservation to cross the international border, or they're coming down from Canada to cross into our reservation. I know that one of the things we referenced in consultation has been to incorporate Anishinaabe our language, and that is really important to us as well. So I just wanted to get up here and have the recorder reflect some of the statements that we've made in consultation, and also have that express ask for an additional community presentation. Be quick, thank you.
So we will now turn it over to anyone attending virtually. If you would like to speak, as I mentioned earlier, you can raise your hand. Looking at the participant list, I don't think anyone is dialed in. If I'm missing someone, you can dial *9, but you should see the raise hand feature When you do that, I will call on you and send you a request to unmute yourself. Again, you can also use the Q&A feature if you would like to type any questions in. But I will now open it up to anyone attending virtually. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak. So there hasn't been anyone that's requested to speak virtually. So individual here has requested we go back to one of the slides to provide some clarification. So we will do that. So could you go back to slide maybe? Oh, Diego, would you be able to go back to the proposed action slide? Thank you. There we go.
Yep.
That one. No, it's a little.
Is the buffer between the state park, you see the trail and the campground area there? Is there going to be an adequate buffer there? Is all the trees, vegetation going to remain in place?
So the just for the folks attending virtually, the question was if there would be adequate buffer between the. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that one more time?
Between the state park, the red.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So between the state park and the construction limits. The blue line represents the maximum potential area. It's my understanding of where construction could occur. So there still is, some buffer there between that and the parking area. Specific distance, or is it possible? Can you pull it up a little bit anymore? Sorry about that. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah. And just a reminder, this is just it's a conceptual layout at this point. It's really just intended to kind of illustrate kind of where we are currently in the process. So, if there are concerns with where, the project footprint is occurring, that's something that we would want to know tonight or throughout the scoping process.
So there is some wetland there that will be improved on the project. And it's still within that easement here. But that we need to either reestablish that wetland or area or wetland maybe. So that's the conversation. As this design progresses.
So again, just for the folks at home, Gary Walker with GSA was just indicating that there could be potential for wetlands disturbance within the construction footprint in some of the wooded areas. But again, that would be a concern that we would identify in EIS once we kind of move forward with the analysis.
Did I just say anything about?
No, I mean, for the benefit of folks at home, it would be helpful if you're welcome to come back up. It's just so folks at home can, and the court reporter obviously could also could capture that.
Would you like it zoomed out or zoomed in?
Pardon?
Would you like it zoomed out or zoomed in?
No, that's okay right there.
Okay, I'll leave it there then.
Presently, we got this physical barrier around the perimeter. Is there going to be any more, I'm going to say, relaxed instead of the chain link appearance of that? The setting is more of a neutral aspect.
Yeah. Yes, it's Gary Rocker again, and yes, there's discussions about removing that fence. It's not 100% yet, but we're still looking at how to mitigate that hard line there and make it easier, an easier transition. Both with landscape and topography.
Another question I had is right where the highway meets the bridge there. There's no access for any local band members. We discussed this earlier. Was a prime place for fisher persons. Presently now it's locked up. You can't access it. You have to access it through water. Is there a way to incorporate that so we have an access to what was a traditional fishing spot from shoreline? And if that is a result, where would we park? People that don't have motorized boat or whatever.
I think it's a perfect opportunity for your questions to us. Obviously recorded, but the written format also. So as we progress in the design, take your comments. That's your concern with your questions. See if there's something engaged. Your questions are phenomenal. As many of you can give us. Research all of them, discuss them. And see if there's incorporated.
Yeah, I think, I will have more, the community will have more questions as we think about this. And we walk out the door, I always think of just like this.
And may I just ask a follow-up question? So when you were saying that there was area to access down by the bridge, was it like parking for vehicles, or are you saying like a marina or a dock, or?
We used to park on the shoulder road, and just where the hand is on the right hand side is your enter the bridge.
Okay.
There's a gate there. It was open before, and then they put up the fence. The gate, you could just open it up, park and all out. But now it's all locked up. There's no place to park.
Your feedback, yeah, that's something we can definitely consider and discuss further.
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
I think I raised my hand. So no one at home has raised their hand. So I guess we'll just do one final call. But if there aren't any additional folks who would like to speak, we will go ahead and conclude the formal presentation. We will be here for the meeting runs until 7 p.m. So we'll be here for another 25 or so minutes. There is a lot of pizza that needs to be eaten, so please, if you are hungry, sorry for folks at home, but GSA folks will all be here to answer any questions, have any follow-up conversations you would like. But really, this has been very helpful. We will take this information and move forward in the EIS process. So I think, again, no one has raised their hand, so I think at this point we can go ahead and conclude the formal presentation. For those attending virtually, again, we very much appreciate you taking the time to participate. And as you mentioned, we will be moving forward with this. The scoping period will be open until October 22nd. The project website, probably the best way to monitor for additional information, and the draft EIS is currently scheduled to be published sometime in the spring of 2024. So with that, we will conclude the presentation, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.